Hey, how you doing? Good evening, guys. Go ahead, come on in, take a seat. We're about to get started. All right, so today we're going to be talking about organizational culture, specifically managing organizational culture. So, for starters, a show of hands, who can tell me how many people can say in their job you have a defined culture that you can think about and kind of identify with your workplace? Maybe it's very specific. You know, you have like an artsy culture because you work in somewhat of an artistic industry, or maybe it's a bit of a nebulous, abstract thing, like maybe it's just a culture of apathy or a culture of passion would be the inverse of that. But how many of you can actually think about a specific culture that kind of defines your office or your brand or the division, your department, just any kind of segment of your organization that you work for? How many people can actually sense like a culture? Okay, so yeah, pretty much all of us. You know, once you think about it, maybe you haven't thought about it before, but you actually do kind of recognize defining characteristics of everyone in your office or your workplace that kind of unites everybody in an attitude that creates what we would call organizational culture. So the organizational culture is what, you know, it's just like any other culture. Like for a country or a region, you've got a culture that kind of defines everyone through some sort of unifying existence. So you've got cultures of rebellion. You might have a culture of pride in your brand or in the thing that you do. Maybe you work for a nonprofit. You have a culture of fulfillment and some sort of a higher calling for the thing that you're doing. But anyway, culture can be anything. It can be defined abstractly, it can be defined specifically, but culture is what keeps a business going or can bring it to its knees. So an organizational culture can make or break your business or your store or whatever it may be. So you have different kinds of cultures that are in some part attributed to the nature of the people who work there. You know, certainly an automotive industry organization is going to be very different from a nonprofit organization. So, for example, I work for Mini. That's going to be very different from someone working for Children's Hunger Fund or Salvation Army. You're going to just have very different kinds of people. Certainly not better necessarily, but you know, you're going to have very different kinds of people with different personalities and interests and the kinds of things that have actually led them to that profession. So you do have a little bit of a unifying characteristic there. However, organizational culture is also, unbeknownst to most employees and even a lot of managers, the organizational culture of any place or business or store is largely defined by its leadership. So the leadership actually determines the overall feel of the organizational culture in general. So for example, like Daft talks about in his management textbook, you might have an authoritarian manager who's just very work-oriented, very task-oriented. He wants results. He wants you to produce things for work. He doesn't really care about your personal life. In fact, he doesn't really understand why you're so concerned with your personal life. He doesn't really get the idle chit-chat. He's really just all about numbers and output, and he wants you to do as much as you can, work as many hours as you can, and he wants to set goals for his staff. And that kind of a culture can be very stressful. It kind of exhausts the people who are in it. So you've got the people in the authoritarian culture, right? And they're overworked, they get burdened. They'll work for a while, you know, they'll be able to work under that kind of stress most of the time, especially once you get into the higher levels of employment. But then eventually you're going to start decline, and you're not really going to care as much about your boss because he clearly doesn't care about you. And so the overall culture of the organization will kind of just have this defeated, oppressed kind of culture to it, or depending on what kind of people you've got, you may actually have what's even worse for the organization, a somewhat of a rebellious secession culture that actually just every individual person is out for their own good, and they almost want to sabotage the organization because their low life satisfaction, not low life, just to clarify, I mean low life satisfaction, just in case that was unclear to you guys. So their low level of life satisfaction, they attribute to that organization, and they start to hate and even do things that are detrimental to the organization on purpose. So that kind of a culture you definitely do not want to foster as a manager. Then you might come over here and you want to avoid that authoritarian culture, so you come over to this side and you say, okay, I want a country club culture. I want everybody to feel welcome. I want everyone to enjoy coming to work. I want to be nice. I want everyone to feel like this is their family, their second home. And so you get kind of that country club culture where everybody's very satisfied at the office. They certainly aren't complaining because their boss is very liberal with hours and time off requests, and you've got mistakes happening, and he says that's fine. You've got the country club culture that just it's very good for employees in the moment. They enjoy that. Certainly they'll have a high level of satisfaction with that for a time, but you aren't going to see results. They don't really respect that kind of manager. That kind of culture kind of fosters a little bit of an actual laziness. And so people will get too comfortable and they won't work. What you really want is a team culture. So team culture is the ideal culture that you're going to be looking for. So team culture has kind of the best of both worlds. So you do have a boss who he expects goals, he expects results, you know what's expected of you as an employee, but he also cares about you as a person. He understands that you make mistakes, he understands that you need time off, but he wants you to grow, he wants you to keep getting better. He's not satisfied with second best, and he thinks neither should you be. And so if this kind of culture pervades the employees, then that will start to flow down throughout the entire organization, and you will see more profits, more productivity, because it just makes sense. When there is a culture of self-responsibility and ownership of your own job, you're going to do your best work. You're going to see to it that the organization thrives because you want it to. So that kind of a team culture is what we want to strive for today. So managing that kind of culture and actually achieving that, that's the hard part. So it's actually a very delicate task, achieving this culture of teamwork and ownership and self-responsibility among your employees, because you don't want people to get too comfortable, but you also don't want people to feel burdened, but you also want people to take what you say seriously. So we're going to talk about the different ways that you can facilitate that. Now, I'm sure as future managers, you would all enjoy just a blueprint of, okay, what can I do? I'm a manager. What can I do for my team to foster that team culture, the team players who all get on board and everybody's just working towards the same goal? How do I make that happen? Well, there's not an exact blueprint. There's not a template that you can just follow for your managerial skills, because like I said, a culture, it lives, it breathes, it's unique to the people who are in your office. So if you've got a certain industry, then you're going to have a certain kind of culture. Even within the automotive industry, which is where I work, for the Mini brand, which is owned by the BMW Group, you've actually got two very different cultures within the BMW Auto Group, because you have the BMW brand, which is very suit and tie, very black and white, and then you've got the Mini brand. So over here you've got the Mini brand, who's very, very opposite of BMW. Even though they're owned by the same people, it's very casual. You wouldn't see me wearing this to work. You're going to see t-shirts, ripped up jeans. I've actually got Mini sneakers here. You can see them with the Mini logos on it. Very nice. But this is what we wear. So BMW doesn't wear that. They're going to wear their ties and their suits. Mini actually forbids ties. BMW requires ties. So you're going to have very different cultures, because you can't expect to apply all of the same managerial rules to both of those cultures and expect the same results, because you're going to get some pushback. The BMW brand appeals to a very different kind of employee than the Mini brand does. So there's no exact template. You have to find what works. And what bodes well for you as a manager is, if you yourself find yourself in that place, chances are you're not going to be so unlike your employees that you're just going to be at a loss for what to do. So, for example, you've got the people who are just very unmotivated and you're trying to get in touch with them, and then you've got the people who are extremely motivated, but they just don't really have much direction. And so you, as a manager, what do you do? So what I would suggest is you actually go ahead and just focus on yourself first. So you can't focus on addressing these people in a certain way and these people in a different way. certainly you're going to have a very different interaction with different personalities, but you want to establish consistency as a manager. So even though, yes, we do have different cultures, different things that are going to separate one organization from another, you want to make yourself very consistent as a manager, and you want people to be able to know, okay, if Jarrett tells me to do something, he wants me to do it right now, he wants it to be done at the very best ability that I can do, and he's not going to forget about it. So you don't want to just say a bunch of things and go off, and then people say, okay, he says that, but he doesn't really mean it. So you definitely want to establish consistency. So next, what you also need to do is focus on setting goals. Your people need to know exactly what you expect of them. These kinds of things are really good because it lets people know, okay, here's what we're doing, here's what we need to be doing, but at the same time, you can't be too caught up in the actual numbers themselves. The goals, from an organizational culture standpoint, of course, profit-wise, we do want to set goals and we want to achieve those goals. But in terms of organizational culture and managing that, the goal is really more for the employees to have something to set their sights on and strive for. So you don't want the goal to be so outrageous that they just give up hope and that they just stop reaching for it. But at the same time, you don't want it to be so achievable that every month everybody's just getting all the numbers, they're knocking it out of the park, and then eventually they get complacent. So you want to strike that middle ground, and you also want to give individual people different goals. So again, you're not being a different person, you're being the same manager with consistent characteristics, but you're also catering yourself to different kinds of people. Now third, and this is very important, I would say this might be the most important thing for organizational management, for organizational cultural management, I should say. And so that would be office conflict. The way that you handle conflict has more of an impact on your office culture than you might realize. So let's say you have two people, and they're in a squabble about something, not even necessarily work-related, but he said something, she didn't like it, and now they're at odds with each other, and now they've come to you, or one of them has come to you, and they expect you to solve it. So these kind of inter-office conflicts, they're divided into three approaches. So you've got the manager who takes the distant approach, you've got the manager who takes the parent approach, which is extremely involved, and then you have kind of the happy medium, which is the counselor approach. Now, I don't want to sound too much in favor of one, although the counselor approach is what I would take myself. However, you are going to find that there are good motivations behind all of these things. So the distant approach comes from the mentality of, these people are adults, they can figure this out for themselves, it's not appropriate because of the boss-employee relationship. And then you've also got over here, you have the parent approach, where the boss is very involved. He stays on top of things, he actually goes out of his way to ask about office conflict, and he goes out of his way to solve those things and give his opinion, where sometimes it's not necessarily needed. And so that kind of comes from a mentality of pragmatism and very efficient running, because he believes, okay, if I'm going to have my place running at full capacity, everyone's got to be at their best. And when you're at your best, you're not having a squabble with your coworkers. So then you also have the counselor perspective, which comes at it from, like I said, a happy medium between the first two. And it really stays apart from the medial drama, but when involvement is necessary, or when your employees come to you, then he will offer his wisdom and sort of guide from afar and point in the right direction without becoming too involved and kind of sinking into that level. So like I said, obviously you can tell by the way that I'm describing them that the counselor position is my preferred method. However, that's not to say that aspects of each of them can't be applied in certain situations. So, the main thing to remember is character. Synthetic character will only produce synthetic results. Your workers will work for you only when you're looking if they do not respect you. You have to have character, and you have to have real integrity in order to establish a respect from your employees, because that is the kind of culture that you want to set. A culture of respect. Respect is the kind of employee who works when you're not looking, because they feel obligated, because they feel a responsibility that they take ownership of. And if you can do that, like I said, that will break or make your business. Thank you.